Yeah, so good morning, everyone. A very warm welcome to all of you to this dialogue. It's our privilege, honor that you've made the time from your undoubtedly busy schedule at this time to come onto this conversation. Thank you, and to everybody. The special thanks to the panelists, Sarah, Mukasa, Richard, Ssewakiryanga, and of course to our moderator, Ashanut Okille. The subject that we're going to be having our conversation on today, that's resourcing development, is so important because right now resourcing development is at a watershed moment for a number of reasons. One is that right-wing or populist, inward-looking leaders are becoming many, and they are trying to redefine what development is. And then the INGO, which which for long has been a quasi-donor, is itself under some form of an existential threat. And some friend quips that the INGO has kind of like three options. Either it transforms, or it dies badly, or dies well. So those are like the three choices to this quasi-donor, the INGO. And then boom, we are now in the COVID-19 era. And we have had to repurpose our program objectives. We have got to reframe our different activities, rethink our ways of working. And as if that's not enough, the industrial, the aid industrial complex, as some people prefer to call it, is itself under some form of assault. And so all these really make resourcing for development such an important subject. And then to add spanner to the works, or the works to the spanner, local philanthropy or community-led philanthropy is gaining currency. I do not know how many webinars you been invited to, and the subject under discussion is local philanthropy. It's being preached harder than it was before. It is being preached as though this is a completely new subject, or it's like some six-legged animal called the local philanthropy has just been brought on planet Earth. And we are having now to just all of us go and see what this creature is. Never mind the different pros and cons. Never mind that we as Ugandans and as Africans generally, giving is really our DNA. We give in different forms. And while we're looking at the subject of sustainability of the sector, resourcing, of course, others are now looking at establishment of a business arm. Where many would argue that this could be a typical recipe for organizational schizophrenia, where you move to the right for free or to the left for a fee. But this is perhaps one way that we can actually look at how do we resource development, how do we resource the sector. The different pathways that we need to be addressing this subject of resourcing development. And our panelists, Richard Ssewakiryanga, who is a household name, and so is Mukasa, Sarah Mukasa. Sarah Mukasa, who's too is a household name. I'm really going to be throwing light, really illuminating all these subjects of resourcing development. And I want to make sure that I save all the time that we can actually dive into this subject. Karibu sana to Sarah Mukasa, karibu sana to Richard Ssewakiryanga, karibu sana to Ashanut Okille, who is going to be our moderator, and to everybody for making the time to this call. I will now hand over to Ashanut to be able to guide us through this dialogue. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Moses, and just as you say, this is such an apt time to have this conversation about resourcing, not just for the sector, but I think we can't forget the COVID-19 pandemic and implications, and how it's making all of us think about how we sustain ourselves as individuals, families, nations, continents. So thank you for the opportunity to be able to moderate, to facilitate this conversation. And as you mentioned earlier, we'll have a quick introduction of panelists, but for everybody else, I'd please like to request that we use the chat to be able to introduce ourselves. I have already been able to see we have people from LIRA. I've seen people from development agencies, NGOs from different parts of the country. So welcome everybody. Now, what we'll do is a quick introduction of the panelists, or actually in the concept note, we call them thought provocateurs, which I think is really appropriate. Really, they're going to really get us thinking about this, about these issues. So I'll just start by asking Sarah to briefly introduce herself. Sarah, please.
Well, good morning, everyone, and I'm really happy to be here. My name is Sarah Mukasa. I've since lost the hair on the picture, but trust me, it's me. I don't know what to say. I work for the Open Society Initiative for Eastern Africa. I'm based here in Kampala. We have been under lockdown for over 18 months now. But I'm very happy to be here. I consider myself to be a feminist, a Pan-Africanist on the left side of the political scale. And so, yes, I'm looking forward to the conversation. Thank you very much for having me.
Okay, wonderful. I think some of that hair passed on to me. Okay.
I was glad to have been of service, Ashanut.
Thank you. So appreciated, my sister. Okay, Richard, I'll just request you to introduce yourself, even if you're a household name, but it would be nice to know sort of where you're based at the moment. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Ashanut. And I will not enter the hair politics, as you can imagine, because I'll be a loser on all sides. But thank you, and it's great to be here. Of course, it is always great to be part of anything that the NGO Forum does, because I spent 11 years there, where in that same spot where Moses is sitting, I can see the window. Is the window I used to look through for many years. So I'm honored that we still have the NGO Forum moving ahead and being able to convene us. For those who don't know me, my name is Richard Ssewakiryanga. I am now at the Center for Basic Research. I did a small stint at MST in Arusha, but COVID decided to bring me back home. And I'm back home, and they are looking after me very well at the Center for Basic Research in Kololo, where I'm a senior research fellow and an advisor.
Okay.
So thank you very much. I will stop there for now.
Okay, great, Richard, and good to have you home. East-West, home is best. Yeah. Paul Mulindwa, please introduce yourself.
Thank you very much, Ashanut, and everyone on the call. My name once again is Paul Mulindwa, and since the hair politics started the round, I've also a little bit changed. Those of us who knew me a few months ago, probably I was not like the way I look, but trying to keep SOPs and everything. This is how I'm now looking. I work with Chitara Civil Society Organizations Network. It's a network organization at regional level, working in Bunyoro, basically sub-region, or what we call the Mid-Albertine region. I'm happy to be part of this conversation, and perhaps I'll be able to share experiences from the grassroots. Thank you.
Yeah, exactly. Fantastic. And indeed, our thought provocateurs are going to bring experiences diverse, right from the grassroots to the Pan-African level to national level. So we're really excited. I can see people are introducing themselves in the chat. Xavier, Rita, someone from Arua. We see you and welcome you to this conversation. So let's get started. We will start, we will have a couple of presentations. Then I will facilitate a conversation amongst our thought provocateurs. And from there, we will then open the discussion to the rest of us to share our own perspectives and experiences. The purpose, again, of this dialogue is for us to reflect on resourcing for the sector, to be able to understand what are the factors that are impacting our ability to attract or even repel, in some cases, resourcing and finances. And these factors are diverse. Then we'll also hopefully be able to think about what is it that we can do. What are some practical steps or interventions that the NGO Forum, I think, can hopefully take a lead in terms of helping us deal with this. So I will start with Sarah. Please, you're welcome to share your thoughts and reflections on this topic.
Thank you very much, and good morning, colleagues. So my task, as I understood it, was to give a bit of an elaboration about what is happening in terms of trends in the funding at the sort of global levels, and try and stimulate some kind of discussion about what that means for us at this national level, as we think about survival issues for our individual organizations as well as for the sector. So I will try my best to do that. And I will explain a little bit about the limitations that I have in doing that, and looking for your assistance to help me with that. And I will do it in three ways. Look at what are some of the key political and economic trends that have shaped both negatively and also provide possible opportunities in the short and long term for the CSO sector in Uganda. Have a very quick look at the trends for post-COVID-19, global trends for post-global-19 funding that will happen possibly for the foreseeable future. And then, sort of try and finish off with what are the, the implications for CSOs in Uganda. Now, a little bit about my limitations. One is the information such as it is in terms of specificity to Uganda, what is coming to Uganda, what is coming to the CSO sector in Uganda is very limited. So again, I will keep it general. I'll aggregate it at the general sort of global level. I also recognize that I have a shortcoming in the sense that CSO is such a broad and generic term and means many things to many people. But as I understand my assignment, it is referring me to a kind of CSO, the one that relies largely on donor funds, which is about 80%, 85% of registered NGOs so I'm talking about a certain kind CSO. And I do recognize that this form of civil society organizing is relatively new in the lifespan of civic engagement in this country. And I also recognize that it is deeply problematized, primarily as an invention or an imposition of a certain global political order and agenda. I note this contradiction, and I will use this CSO as a locus of study in order for us to hopefully ask wider questions as we go on through this program. And you know, ultimately, what we want is to seek a sort of evolution of civic engagement as we try to grapple with these deeply political questions. And similarly, I have a problem. Donors is a very generic term. And in terms of typology, it umbrellas a whole host of players: multilateral, bilateral, philanthropies, individual, private, and public. And all the literature that I've looked at assumes that the donoring comes from the global north to the south. So there's very little there about what is happening in the south, with the exception of China, which has been reviewed very largely in negative terms. So I will aggregate this information to include as many of those actors as I can, but the information such as I have it is mostly from the north, limited though it is. It's supposed to be public information, but you know, the data mining that you have to do in order to get some you know, information is really quite incredible. And in the time, and also the ability limits that I have to mine through that data, you know, it was difficult. But I'll start by saying that, you know, the COVID-19 pandemic has brought to the fore many of the key structural asymmetries of power and decision-making that have shaped development and global relations over the past 4 decades or more. What began as a health crisis quickly turned into a political, social, and economic crisis as global supply chains were severely disrupted through lockdown, border closures, and disruptions in the movement of goods. All of these, which are key principles on which free trade and market-led growth have been premised. And those have been our key sort of development tools in the global development system. Now, what we also know is that these intersecting and reinforcing health, economic, climate, political, and democratic crises have hurt certain populations more than others. People of color, young people, persons with disabilities, gender diverse communities, and women have borne the disproportionate burden of these intersecting crises. I will argue in my presentation that whilst COVID-19 accelerated the crisis, in many ways, where we are is the culmination of the choices we have made in our economic and political development over the years. In other words, it's not an accident. Many people had foreseen it coming in terms of collapse, perhaps not with COVID-19, but if it had not been COVID-19, it would have been something else. So, you know, the shock of COVID-19 is what has brought many of the realizations to the fore. So I'll start with the global trends. Now, in many ways, the NGO Forum concept note really did my work for me. I don't know why you've invited me here, actually. But the concept note highlighted a number of global trends. These include, you know, populist nationalism in the West, and, you know, the sort of retreats to looking inwards in terms of political and economic priority. We remember the Trump America First. We saw Brexit, and we saw all of these, all of these countries pulling away from what are international systems, and through which the architecture of international development has traditionally been directed. And so the pull back from, the US, for example, pulling out of funding the World Health Organization, or Brexit, UK Brexit from the European Union, and what that meant in terms of how that institution conducts international cooperation, and the UK as well, had implications for us here on the ground. They also talked about the shifts in the power dynamics, global power dynamics, as many of the traditional donor economies begin to shrink or begin to mature and decline. What we have seen is that the void filled by, or that they're being challenged by new entrants like China into development assistance, but also other countries, Gulf states, and so on. And the uncertainty that that brings in terms of the traditional work of this particular CSO that's involved in democratic practice, human rights, and so on. The paper signposts, the Chinese records on human rights nationally inside China, and its tacit disregard for the same in its lending and donor practices. So I'll place map those in terms of forward discussion. Now to this, I'll add two other key trends that we're going to see. One, of course, which is very obvious, but which we don't talk about very much in development circles, and I'm not sure why. But of course, the impact of COVID-19 means that the development indicators will worsen. The World Bank estimates that in sub-Saharan Africa, as many as 43%, which is, I think, just over 120 million or something like that, will be thrown back into poverty, below the poverty line, wherever that line is. We will be saddled by high levels of unemployment. We will also be saddled by debt and climate-related shocks, which will continue to plague our responses to social and economic recovery, as well as the health crisis. That debt will be compounded by the fact that our governments will have serious shortfalls in internal revenue, with significant decreases in foreign direct investment, which again is another key assumption of the market-led growth strategies that we have been pursuing, that foreign direct investment will be a key marker of our economic growth and in the economic growth trajectory. Well, that will severely decline. Remittances, revenue from remittances will also severely decline.
Chris, can you unmute
Are
Sarah?
you muted?
Somebody needs to unmute Sarah. Chris?
She can only unmute herself.
Okay.
Someone accidentally muted her while
It has
muting her.
unmuted you.
Okay.
It says, okay. All right. It said the host had muted me. Digital authoritarianism.
I think you've muted yourself again.
Sarah, okay, now you're unmuted.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry about that. Okay. Are we here? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So remittances and receipts from tourism, these traditional internal revenue flows will severely decrease. And we will be left with, incapacity to respond to the social and economic recovery efforts that we need. And this will increase social unrest. Now, our governments will most likely respond to these challenges as security crises, and the responses will be militarized. We can already see the increased expenditure on military and security sector in Uganda has increased significantly above that of our health or of the efforts to mitigate the social and economic impacts of COVID-19. Whilst that may be the case, it is also highly unlikely that the lending and development assistance will decrease as a result of this state of affairs. In other words, the response in terms of donor decisions and choices will not be triggered by what's happening on the ground. It will be triggered by other sort of economic interests, economic and political interests, which go beyond, our need for well-being and social services. So it's a very, very tricky time for us here on the ground in Uganda and on the rest of the continent. We do have one or two positive trends. The first are that donors and donor governments alike are all asking themselves critical questions about what needs to be changed to develop in development practice. In other words, more than it being about money that is lacking, it is about ideas. It is about ideas. The well of ideas is running dry, as it were, in terms of the development alternatives, in terms of the development, imperatives within this sort of global architecture that we have. So I think for me, a positive trend is that now is the time to challenge some deep-seated assumptions about development, which has not worked for the vast majority of Africans or people on the continent. It's coming through, for instance, whilst, it's been recognized that there has to be a global health initiative in funding health as a public good. The donors have thrown money at this public good called the vaccine, for example, but have not addressed the inherent inequities and the corrosive impact that the multilateral, the transnational corporations in the form of big pharma and others have. So on the one hand, we recognize that actually these things are public goods. We need to do something about getting access and so on. But we haven't done anything, nothing has been done to disrupt those current systems that keep the inequalities intact. So we're throwing the money at the problem, we're not addressing the systemic underlying causes of it. A second positive trend is that we're seeing more sort of South-South cooperation. You know, and this, I think, is primarily useful for us in addressing the sort of, I guess, this sort of understood conventional wisdom that the global equals the North. That the North, the North is at the, you know, the North has the hegemony and the sort of sets the agenda for what happens at global level, as though we are not part of the global community, as though we don't have anything to offer in terms of ideas, ideation, practice, and so on. So the increases in global supply chains have been disrupted. International collaboration has been compromised, but we have seen greater engagement between partners in the South that challenge the myth that development assistance and technical know-how is a one-way flow from North to South. So early in the pandemic, for example, we saw Cuba sending professionals to Europe to respond to the crisis. We see vaccine manufacturing capacities. Cuba now has a vaccine. We've seen what had happened in countries like India. We're seeing the manufacturing of PPEs and so on. It's getting a conversation going about how we reorient these global supply chains to make Africa and the South a little less dependent and a little less, you know, low on the sort of pecking order of the global value chain. And the third thing that I think is a very hopeful thing is the sort of movement for the decolonization that has been reawakened by such movements as the Fees Must Fall in South Africa and Black Lives Matter, which started in the US. I mean, the decolonization movement is a very, very old movement, but it has been reawakened, especially with the Black Lives Matter during the COVID pandemic, in response to police brutality. Now, the debates on decolonization have permeated the development field, in particular, private philanthropy institutions, also uncovering all kinds of inequalities in funding practice. I will try and expound on these later in the question and answer session from Ashanut. But I mean, you know, we can see what we understand by you know, colonization and sort of institutionalized, what we are responding to as a form of institutionalized racism and white supremacy. We are seeing it and how it unfolds in sort of how the North, which has been on the one hand, you know, sort of arbitrating international cooperation and so on, we have seen the hoarding behavior and the sort of what has been termed vaccine apartheid, in the way that they have hoarded the vaccines, they have supported big pharmacy over global public health interests, and so have refused to waiver intellectual property rights, so that the vaccine, which is considered a public good, can be made and manufactured across the globe. And we can also see that you know, the advances in medicine, you know, much has been written about over the years in terms of how international institutions such as the World Health Organization treat medical practice of other cultures with almost disdain, and you know, again reinforcing that technical know-how comes from the North, and we are just passive consumers of what the North provides for us. And this whole movement around decolonization is challenging that. So those are three possible things that I see providing an avenue for us to organize in terms of ideas, in terms of looking for different ways of practice, in terms of formulating new visions about what development should be, and also about asking tough questions about our development practitioners, our donors. I don't like the term donor because I'm not particularly sure that in this relationship what we're seeing is a donor, is a donor as I understand the term donor. But we can talk about that a little bit more. So let me move very quickly to some of what I see are the trends for post-COVID-19 funding, and then quickly sort of end with what I think are some of the opportunities therefore that we have. So really the benchmark and the template for COVID-19 and post-COVID-19 was set really in 2020, I think, with the launch of the $8.3 billion pledges in response to the pandemic through the global coronavirus response that was co-convened by the European Union and other countries, Canada, France, Germany, Italy, and Japan, amongst others. Now, this pretty much set the template for funding that will, I guess, permeate the way we are looking at funding priorities, global funding trends and priorities over the next few years. So there are three key areas, and they will vary as the time goes on. The first, of course, is the financing for the vaccines, diagnostics, and the therapeutics. And that has gone on, and we have seen some of the politics around that. We have seen some of the developments around that, and some of the practices that have left us with very few in terms of access to these to DVTs. The second is funding to alleviate the health impacts in low and middle income countries. That includes humanitarian assistance, health systems strengthening through treatment centers, you know, the whole ventilators, oxygen, PPEs, you know, abilities to, you know, health practitioner support, strengthening the health systems, basically. There is some reproductive health, sexual and reproductive health investment from countries like Sweden and Australia, but these are a tiny proportion of that overarching ambition. And the third is the financial support to mitigate the wider economic and social impacts. This will be looking at social protection, debt restructuring, humanitarian aid and food assistance, looking at climate change, and many of them looking at how to create jobs for the vast majority the unemployed. And the bulk of the funding is steered through multilateral organizations such as the World Health Organization, IMF, UN agencies. But really, this has set the benchmark for where, you know, multilateral and bilateral funding is going to go over the next few years as we battle with this virus. What may lose out in terms of, you know, because once they fund something, something else has to go, and there's been a lot of speculation about that. But you know, it ventures from, you know, social, you know, human rights, standard human rights work, social rights, things like gender, and the rights of minority communities, and so on. Those specific pathways will be shut down in this sort of, and enveloped in this sort of next sort of, how much time do I have? Okay, let me just go on.
Give you about another five.
Okay, let me just go on.
Yeah.
So this is the architecture that's been set and the priorities that have been set by sort of multilateral and bilateral arrangements with governments, and it is not very clear how much of this will be geared towards civil society in Africa. But if past studies have hovered at between, you know, sort of 5% going to civil society organizations on the continent from these particular pots of money. And I mean, if you are in women's rights work, if you're in, you know, gender diversities work, it's less than 2% of those funds, if past studies are to be looked at. Now to that, philanthropies, especially private philanthropies such as the one that I work for, the Open Society Foundations, have added, you know, threats to democratic freedoms, human rights, rule of law, media freedoms, electoral integrity, and authoritarianism as a result of COVID-19. They've added to the economic mitigation, impact investment for innovation and entrepreneurial, you know, job creation, social protection, and also an interest in looking at what are the alternative models for development. What are some of the alternative models? Again, the ideation question. Now, as I move on, in terms of, before I get to where I think the opportunities are, and you know, what can be done by those of us here in Uganda, I would say that all, as I argued before, that all of these trends do not take place in a contextual or a historical vacuum. Donor decisions and practice are ideologically and politically determined. Therefore, how we understand and respond to these underlying drivers of donor practice is critical. It's critical that we understand this. Now, this is an act of political engagement rather than technical skills development. There needs to be some political savviness that we exercise in understanding some of these underlying drivers. So, and what are they? And there are numerous drivers. We've talked about some of them, the assumption that development, that the North is the paradigm that we should all look to for development, and the enormous privilege that that brings to a certain demography of the global community. The concentration of resources resources and power in the hands of the global North over the global South. And the assumption that actually that the development assistance has driven from the North to the South and helped the South in their development needs. The other, of course, is and much has been said about this, so I won't spend too much time about this. But of course, the sort of neoliberal market-led growth, economic, and also to some extent political models, which have been a resounding failure for the vast majority of the world's poor. And the vast majority of the world's poor have rejected globalization. And why should we reject globalization in Africa? Because of course we do want to cooperate internationally, but the terms of that global engagement have to change. Africa's place in that global sort of hierarchy is at the bottom as producers yes. of primary raw materials.
Chris, is Sarah muted again?
Okay, yeah, she's unmuted now.
Okay, good.
Did I do that? Anywho, yeah, that, yeah, and so we've rejected globalization because it has placed us at the bottom of a pecking order as producers of raw materials that feed the economic development interests elsewhere. So that, you know, all we do is extract and plunder. And it's even more pernicious than that. I mean, in the 90s, we're still, you know, reeling from the hangover of the good governance agenda of the 90s that somehow said that political democracy would be achieved through electoral, you know, regular free and fair elections, supply side strengthening, judiciary strengthening, parliamentary, and so on and so forth, on the one hand, and then quite separately, open up your markets for global competition, read global extraction, and completely disinvest in social development as the state. And that somehow that disconnect between the economic and the social development priorities that we would have, that disconnect would be taken care of through the process of elections and free and fair regular elections and so on, and attention to human rights, civil and political rights, as though social and economic rights were somehow, you know, so we'll take care of your economies, we'll take care of your social development needs, you just take care of one another. And the sum total of that is we've been slinging mud at each other in all of this, and they've been happy for us to be slinging mud at one another, whilst at the same time taking care of our economies and our markets, and you know, extracting extracting those resources. and have left us really poor to, unable to defend ourselves from that onslaught. And we see now where, transnational corporations have far more power to decide what the global agenda, even for development, is than most of our governments put together. And certainly, if we look at what we have invested in over these years in the electoral process, the amount of money we have spent and the returns on that investment compared to what we have invested in building our economies and in building our social fabric, I think there is cause for worry there. And so clearly, we have to be clear as civil society, and we have to ask ourselves very, very, very tough questions about the narratives we have absorbed, the narratives we have propagated, and the narratives about our own ideas of development that need investment from us. So, as we move on, in terms of the opportunities, well, I mean, in the short term, civil society organizations, I think, are very well aligned with the priorities that are being that have been shaped by this sort of global architecture in response to COVID-19. There are many of us who are doing service delivery. There are many of us who are doing advocacy work around services. There are many of us who are doing the sort of political rights work that have come up as priorities. And so in the short term, the question that we have is, how do we develop that entrepreneurial skill to mainstream the COVID, the sort of COVID priorities to the work that we're already doing? I mean, we're living these lives. This is where we are. And so, what is the value that we add to that process? I'm talking about this in the short term. Now, again, in terms of internally, in terms of orienting ourselves in the short term, I think many of us come to this work as activists. We don't necessarily have an agenda to build institutions, and building institutions happens very accidentally to the work that we do. I learned about building institutions being just as important as doing the work, and actually they can't be separated. And therefore, there are certain things that we need to do. I mean, most of us on our boards have people who think like us in terms of how we develop our policy, our programs, our projects, and so on. We don't think about bringing entrepreneurs to ask us tough questions about, the sustainability that we have. And I've served on several boards, and I've seen the sort of herd mentality that we have in terms of how we think about what a good institution and what a good board is. A board is a multi-skilled, diverse, multi-sectoral. Most of those organizations that plan for their long-term survival at the start of their programming have a much better sense of what it is that they need to do in order to build that muscle in the organization, in the makeup of the staff, in the makeup of the board, in the makeup of the leadership, in the makeup of the ethos of the organization. And, so I think, those are some of the things that we can do. But I think in the long term, I hope our agenda is one of structural transformation. I hope that our agenda is one that is asking deep-seated questions about the visions that we have for the country and for ourselves as citizens of this country. Deep-seated questions. What is the role of the state? And how do we get the state there in terms of our vision? Do we want this state whose job it is to continue creating wealth without jobs, without any sort of means of generating protection for citizens? What are the economies that we want to build? The COVID-19 has told us that care is a very important aspect of our economic planning, and yet it is the place that we have invested the least. Healthcare workers paid badly, women, women's unpaid care labor, and so on and so forth. All the industries of care, all the people that were termed essential workers, all the resilience mechanisms that we had in our communities during this lockdown, the small farmer, the small local investor, not the foreign direct investor, the local investor. What are the serious questions we're going to ask, and how are we going to shape a vision around these things? The decolonizing agenda I will speak to afterwards. It suggests to me that constituency building and knowledge development, deep political consciousness raising, is an important part of the work that we do. Political education is critical, and collective processes for advocacy such as the NGO Forum, part of the role of places like this is for us to hone and build our capacity for producing truly African-led solutions that are both intersectional in nature. What do I mean by intersectional? We don't live single lives. We live at the juncture of political, economic, and social life. And that if we are to be truly democratic, we need to build a holistic, multi-sectoral set of responses to the crises that we have that involve an understanding of each of the communities and how they are impacted by these phenomena. And I guess, we need to build the kinds of visions that help us to reconnect to our own humanity, that take pride in who we are, that believe in ourselves, and that find a new level of confidence in who we are as people with ideas. Okay, let me end there.
Oh, wow. Okay. Oh, that was wonderful. Thanks a lot, Sarah, for really contextualizing this conversation about resourcing. I think it's very easy for us to get limited in our thinking to where are we sending the next proposal. But I think you're helping us see, look, this is not just about the proposals. This is a wider political issue, and that we need to engage. And when you speak about the political consciousness and awareness, I think it has to start with us even before it goes to the community. And thanks for raising opportunities around ideation, around the need for us to find solutions, around institution building, and what does that actually mean, and actually really investing in building institutions that work. So thanks again for that. I will now ask Richard to share his perspective. Richard will be sort of bringing the conversation now, picking on where Sarah came from, global coming to national, what NGO Forum should do. Richard will also be speaking to nationally, what are some of the things that we need to do in order to be able to access or to generate these resources? Richard, welcome.
Thank you very much, Ashanut. And we want to thank Sarah. Sarah has done us very well because she has painted a very important picture. And, it's always a blessing and an honor to hear you, Sarah. So thank you very much for what you have done. And of course, we thank our colleagues at NGO Forum, Moses and others, Chris, for bringing us together. And Ashanut for organizing us so that we can think coherently. So what I'm going to do now is really to take the discussion that Sarah has given us and anchor it down into 4 practical things. I have worked for about, and now I'm approaching 3 decades. And I keep thinking that I have to be very careful around what I spend time on. And so I want to encourage all of you to sort of, when you listen to what I'm saying, say, what does this mean in terms of practical things that we can do? And since I left NGO Forum, I have invested a lot of my time in reading and thinking. And as you can imagine, I haven't gone to any talk show, so you haven't heard me speaking because I'm thinking, yes, it's important for somebody to keep quiet for some time, especially after you have spoken for 11 years on every talk show and every TV show and every workshop and other things. So this is the time I am in as a person. A feminist like Sarah will tell you that you have to speak from a position. And so I am expressing my positionality before we move into what I want to say. So they asked me to talk about the fact that the question is philanthropy and social enterprise a panacea. Those of you who know more English than me, you know that when we talk about a panacea, we are talking about something that is a solution or a remedy to everything. Now, I want to say that there are many ways of looking at this, but in this presentation, and I'm going to try and keep it into 10 minutes because I gave some of my time to Sarah, that we need to ponder 3 things. One is we should ask the question, should we be talking about CSO resourcing at this point? Because Sarah has told us that we have to, now is the time to think. It is no longer time to just do. But then we also have to ask what type of resources do we need, okay? Because that is also important. If you think you just need money, then you tell us and we see how to get you money. If you need something better, then we decide what to do. And then the other one is what type of actions should CSOs undertake in order for them to actually get to where they want to get. So I think that we should be talking about CS. If you asked me, should we be talking about CSO resourcing at this point? My answer is yes and no. And CSOs, I don't think should be looking, as you know, we always say we look for resources. I don't think this is the time to look for resources, but I think this is the time to explore new ways of generating resources. And I think that is where I'm going to differ, that what we are doing is not just looking, but exploring. And I think the presentation that we have had is clear. And I liked the point that was made that indeed right now, what is happening is that we have to understand that the well, as Sarah has called it, the well of ideas is running dry. So one of the things we have to do is to find ways in which we can fill up that well. So in terms of context, I think Sarah has done a lot. So I won't spend a lot of time on the context. We know the context that we have. We have a new reality. There is a pandemic, which we have to embrace. This pandemic has democratized pain and it has democratized crisis. So, you know, Italians died just as Ugandans died, as Kenyans died, as Americans died, and we are still dying. So there is that, which is that many situations are, you know, showing that there is a lot of pain that we are going through. And this pain doesn't even it's not about those who have and those who do not have. So even within the spectrum of inequality, the level of pain that societies, that families, communities are going through is more or less the same. The other thing is that I think the implications that you know, have also been touched on a bit is that we have new implications. Sarah talked about the care economy and how that is an economy that we have significantly ignored, and it's been ignored. But right now, when the public was asked to go home and become home workers, you know, at some people never knew.
Chad, you still there?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me? Have I gone off?
Yes, we can hear.
Yeah, we can hear you.
You can hear me? Because Ashanut was, I thought you were saying something. Okay. So the point I was making there is that when they asked us to go home and then, you know, the public went home, offices went home, we all started working from home. I think that has huge implications, and we have to think very clearly and ask ourselves, what does this mean? Not only for the care economy, but also for the public. One of the crises that is happening now in America is that people are refusing to go back to work. They are saying, well, I now know what to do when I'm at home. Why should I go in the traffic, in the train, in the this and the other? And many of us are even starting to think about such options. So that is in itself an important thing. We've talked about the philanthropy and gifting and all these things. The truth is that a lot of giving has gone on in this pandemic, lots of money. I mean, if you ask, every politician in Uganda is buying posho. I don't know if we all eat posho, but, you know, posho, nowadays they started buying some matoke and, you know, lots of giving is going on. But what does that mean? We have to really interrogate that giving, because it has a message beyond just the fact that this is a giving. I am doing a bit of research on this. I just finished a paper with CSO, looking at their general state studies and trying to make meaning. So if you go to the CSO website, I saw it was published yesterday. The issue which Sarah has talked about also, which is the issue around how governments have reacted to this pandemic. I think this is the pandemic which is full of contradictions, because you see, when you fall sick, it is the virus entering your body. But actually, you find the government locking you up from going anywhere else and not locking the virus from entering your body. So you ask yourself the question, at what point will government start locking viruses from entering our body instead of locking us as people? And that is an important question, because indeed the crisis of the world is that we seem to think that the solution is sometimes in certain places where they are not. But these I'm raising are interesting questions for us to reflect on, because I'll come back to them later. The other thing is that we have seen significant changes. Yes, some people think this is a very tough time, people are suffering, but ask the owner of this facility called Zoom. I don't think that they are looking at you and thinking that they are suffering. They are running to the bank and laughing all the way to the bank. And that is true for online shops. I have a colleague who all of a sudden moved his shop, her shop online, and they are doing very well in this pandemic because they are able to, you know, unlock the advertisement that has been available for long under Facebook and many other things. Many restaurants have now realized that delivering food, even me here in Chicago now, I can eat cafe javas when at home. You know, a few years ago, they will tell you, oh, the dust to your place is too much, but now it no longer matters. They turn up with their motorbike and I get to pay and eat a nice meal. That's the kind of change that we are talking about. And the development community is also doing a lot. So much as we talk about inequality now, there is a lot of, democratizing of knowledge that has happened. I have been posting on the CSO leaders, several meetings that are happening globally with donors, with everybody who are thinking about what they need to do tomorrow. And, those meetings before we would have to go and line up for a visa. After a visa, you go to the airport, you arrive with jet lag, you sit, all these things have been cut out, and now we are meeting on real content. Now, this is a very powerful thing that has happened, but some of us, are still thinking that we need to wait for the pandemic to end and then we go back for a visa. And then, no, there are lots of new things that are happening. But where am I going with this? I'm going with this whole thing which I'm talking about is I need to make 4 points on it. And if we can take these 4 points and use them, for me, I think that is the kind of resourcing that we need as civil society. Okay? Even us as beneficiaries, we have changed. In many communities, as I've said, people are home, they are locked up, many things are happening. But also, there is can you ask Muhumuza to mute? There is a significant challenge that we must put our minds to. Education and learning need to be urgently rethought and redesigned. Redesigned to address not only the current crisis, but to address the future. I know people who, many here in Uganda, I think we have a crisis because we have no thinkers in the education system. People are waiting for the pandemic to go and then restart education. There is nothing like that. The crisis has taken away 2 years of our children. What do you do with that? We have to do something around how we structure. Do we come up with new models of learning? So there is a new way in which we should be thinking about how society deals with those things. So while some people have become desperate, others have found new ways of working and are being successful. And social interaction may be limited, but we know that societal connection is now sometimes even more. I know when I worked at the NGO forums, when we would convene these civil society leaders retreats, we would only have at least 30 people. And we have a hotel and we have to eat sumbusa and lunch and this and that. But here we are 100 people. We are now meeting. That in itself is a connection that we come to see and value as something new that has happened. Now, what that means is we have to ask the question, have CSOs changed how they respond? It would be good to know. For example, I wanted to know, how have you responded? One quick question would be to ask everybody on this call, did you, for example, relook at your vision as an organization and develop a short-term and long-term response to this pandemic and to really manage this process? Because that's critical. We know that for every organization today that is existing, there is no way you are going to continue to do anything the way you used to do it before. You may like it or may not like it, but that's the reality. But the other thing is that what are you going to do differently if you are going to be relevant? This is something that we must put our minds to. But also to ask the question, what resources do we need? I saw some people from DGF here. I think the budgets coming after this pandemic are not going to be full of fuel and mineral water and water and those things that we used to budget for. They have to have other items and different things. So there will be new resources that are required. And therefore, we must be able to start a process of reflecting on that. So I want to submit that there are 4 types of actions that have to be taken if we are to remain relevant. First action, we must invest in critical thinking. Not just thinking, but critical thinking. Okay? This is, we are doing a short module for local government leaders, and we have talked to the local government, Minister of Local Government. And one of the sessions we have there is on critical thinking. Dr. Muhereza is at CBR would have been the best to explain this. But the thing is that the point where we are now, we must return to critical thinking. And what is critical thinking? Let me first illustrate. Okay, has anybody seen the image on the screen? So if you see this image on the screen, and I want Chris for you to help me. For those who see a rabbit, I want them to type R in the comment section. And those who see a bird, I want you to type B in the comment section. And I'll give you half a minute to do that. If you see a bird, you type R. If you see a rabbit, you type B. And if you see both, you type R and B. And then we just have a look at what is coming out in the comment section. Chris, you will tell me how many B's you have had and how many R's you have, broadly. Okay, Chris, can you tell me how many people have typed R?
So we have 70% have typed R and B, and then I think 15% R, and then 15% B. Okay. So I'm using my mathematical eye to estimate this.
Yes,
so
I
it's
know,
an estimation.
I know. And your mathematical eye is very accurate. So another one more image. Okay, in this image, if you see two horses on their 2 feet, you type H, and if you see a face of a person, you type F for face. Okay, Chris, are you there? What are your percentages?
So 70%, close to 75, H and F, and then a small number, about 10%, saying F.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
can I say, when you provide an option of typing F and H, the answers drastically change to H and F.
okay.
Yeah.
So the thing is, and that is good. Why is it good? Because what we see here is very interesting, because what you have is a very, those images, we usually use them, especially when we are training people, you know, about imagining and critical thinking and other things. But as people, one of the things we have to appreciate and understand is that we become what we think about. So if we are going to do anything that is going to be helpful, we have to appreciate that as a fact of life, that we become what we think about. That is at the level of a person. But even at the level of the institutions and organizations, we become, or we build those institutions that we think about. Now, if we want to build institutions that are going to weather the storm, the question to ask is, what are you thinking about? Are you thinking about that institution? Are you building that institution in your mind so that you can now say this is the kind of institution? That's one. But also, the other thing is that beyond just thinking about what you need to become, as critical thinkers, one other dynamic of critical thinking is investing time in probing what we call established positions. And I've given a few here, but even if you took the discussion that Sarah has just finished, she gave us some really interesting insights around some of the things that are going to be happening to us in the world today. We know that the dynamics of funding streams trends, as we know them, are going to be very different. That all of a sudden, while we are busy pushing our governments to do something, the people who are manufacturing vaccines are private companies. And therefore, for you to acquire a public vaccine, which is a public good, you have to go through a private company in order to get to that public good. What does that mean for us? How should we then now engage with this thing called private sector? What kinds of ways should we engage with this question of us actually failing, both at a government level and other levels, to negotiate our way over the private interests in public services. Because this crisis has shown us clearly that that is the crisis that we have in countries, especially here in Africa. Because if you think about it, if you go to UK, nobody was telling you we're paying, £10,000 or £100,000 to treat COVID. We're just seeing people taken to hospitals. But here, all of a sudden, it has become an economic question. So what does that mean? So that's what I'm saying, that we must interrogate the established positions to be able to say, as civil society, this is where we want to go. For example, one of the things many civil society people have had talking about is, there is no money. The money is now gone. Donors are going to go home because people are sick in their countries. That is an interesting thing. But to remember, actually, money doesn't leave the earth and go to moon. All the money in the world is here on earth. The only problem, it is in different pockets. So when you think about what is going to happen to economies, remember that actually resources are there for everybody and they are enough. If you take a few billionaires in this world, they can afford to give $1 billion to everybody on earth. But that is not happening. But that means that you have to think differently if we are going to think about a world where we are able to engage with that question. When you say donors only care about their countries, as I've just mentioned before, that when we look at giving, the statistics on giving is that giving has happened the most during this crisis. I remember when the basketballers, in the first pandemic, one of them came up and gave, thousands of laptops to children to stay at home. Manchester in the football, whatever, did lots of bags for children to continue with education. There's a billionaire in America who gave, invested lots of money in just researching the vaccine. Some of it was not public money. So it is true that actually there is a lot that is happening, that even with donors, who we could discuss the issue of donor, the terminology, but at least even with those who come from those kinds of countries where we've been getting resources, I think the dynamic is still different. We say the whole world is in crisis. Yes, it is in crisis, but there are many things that have happened. One thing that amazes me, or for me, which I keep remembering, is that 2 billionaires have gone to space during this time of the pandemic. Jeff Bezos and Richard Branson have all gone to space. And I was watching on CNN last week when Jeff Bezos came back to Earth. The first thing he did was to give away $200 million to one to a CNN anchor and another to somebody who has a kitchen cooking organization that feeds people. Now, the thing is that what I'm trying to demonstrate is that if we use critical thinking and we invest in probing every established position, that is the first resource that we must all have. And I can tell you the crisis that we have in civil society in Uganda is we used to say we want thought leaders, and we used to have these thought leadership seminars. And many people come, when they finish eating their tea and have coffee, they talk about transport refund, they forget about thinking. And right now, the crisis we could have as a sector is to try and make sure we return to that mandate of us being the critical thinkers. Because you see, even the state is struggling to come up with the right ideas around how to run this country. And what are we doing? We are not offering them. So my point, number one, invest in critical thinking. By being practical things, is you have to be an avid reader. You have to read as many books as you have in your field. I'm not saying you have, no, there are no textbooks here. In your field, if you're working in energy, in oil, in the environment, in finance, in your field, make sure that you know the knowledge out there and what it is that it can tell us about what needs to be done. People are writing. People are doing everything to make sure that they share knowledge. So that's the practical thing that at least for me, I want to put on the table. Because if we are going to get new options, this is an essential skill that we have to have right now. And I hope I have convinced you that that is one skill that you must get. The second is also, it's very good that Sarah talked about visions. I remember her talking about us formulating new visions of what development should look like. Now, what that means is that at a very personal, practical level, as a person who is working in civil society, the first thing you have to do is to invest some time in visioning. Now, visioning is one of those interesting things because it is the thing that we all do every day, and it is the thing that sometimes we don't put any investment in practically. Because sometimes we are scared of our own visions. You think about something and then you say, oh my God, how can I have that thing? Then you close that vision. But visioning is using your mind's eye to see the finished future that you want to achieve. If we are going to do anything that is going to disrupt the inequality that we see, that is going to create the structural transformation that we want, the first thing is there must be people who will invest in visioning that future, clarifying it in our minds that this is how it is going to work. So today's CSOs must return to the basics and do some visioning. You have to now ask the question, what type of organization should we be in the next 5 years if we have all the resources we need? Because that's the vision. Usually, if you are building the house, you first think about it in the head, then you go to the architects, they draw it on a plan, and then you build. But at least it should be finished in your head that either I want a storied house or whatever. You don't think about bricks when you are thinking about your house. You think about a house. And that's the thing that we also need to bring to this discussion, that we should be thinking about the finished work that we want to see as civil society. And that is a critical skill. But if we do not have a vision of how the next 5 years, the next 10 years are going to look like for us, from our perspective, then it will be very hard for us to pursue the things that we want to pursue. The pandemic has created a new reality, hence we should also create new visions to start from the reality that we have. The reality today is there is a pandemic. So this is where we start. If we are still alive, thank God, because all of us have suffered from COVID. You may like it or you may not like it, but thank God that you are still alive. Now, if you are still alive, there was a say in our church, you ask yourself, why has God left me alive? And then you start from there, because the reality is we must start a vision that starts with this new benchmark of the fact that we have an issue called a pandemic. So the second resource that you must invest in is visioning for the future that you want. First as individuals, but also as organizations. And then as a collective, because we need to continue to operate. We can't continue to operate using the obsolete visions that we had before the pandemic. Because we, as all of us know, you don't want to sit in a car that is going nowhere. So it's something that looks small, but it's an important part of the investment that we have to make. If you haven't done anything in terms of visioning for your organization to say, what will this thing look like, this organization I'm sitting at? And this is also true for NGO Forum. So Moses, my good friend, this is the time for you to vision again and say the Ssewakiryanga era is over. Don't go back to that history. The reality is we have a pandemic. Let's see how it looks like in the future. Because that's how we shall get ourselves to the next level. The third point for me is we need to invest in solutions. And I am very careful here because sometimes we misunderstand the point that we make here. But when I say solution, I say that we must invest in a solution-focused mind. What does that mean? That the vision that CSOs create will inevitably surface very many problems. But all of us must understand that we need to become solution-oriented and not problem-focused only. Because right now, when you think about it, the level of negative mindsets that are available to tell you all the problems in the world, to tell you how things are failing, are everywhere. You go to the WhatsApp groups, that's why I don't answer many of them, but they are talking. And what are they telling each other? Every negative thing. But we have to ensure that there is a focus on a solution-oriented way of thinking. Why? Because when you go into a solution, the way of thinking, you are investing, you are introducing a dose of optimism in the things that you need to do. And this is a simple step, but if we all, as civil society, invested in finding solutions which would work, that in itself can help us with how we can deal with the problems we can deal with. Now, in terms of understanding the issue around solutions, it's not to say that you are going to only, because many people say, I may think about a solution, but no, first think about those that you can have in your sphere you're going to influence, and then you add others, and then you move on. Because finding solutions is really about designing and offering the best quality service or product or whatever you want to offer to your beneficiary or to those whom you engage on. So it's about becoming different yourself in terms of the things that you are able to offer to others. Because the thing that is going to happen today is that mediocre organizations are going to die. Before you could pretend and sit in a workshop and pretend, but probably now that there are no workshops, if you can't pretend, then you will die. So the issue of saying what kind of investments should we be making to ensure that if we understand a problem, we should think beyond that problem to say what solutions should we have. So we should invest in defining, developing, and deploying solutions. That is where the CSO sector can be relevant and it will find resources it needs. Because as I've said for many years, resources and money follow good ideas. And you see, that is the strange thing about money. It doesn't move in a lonely way. It wants to first see if there is a good idea in front of it and it will follow. So all you need to do is to think through things that can become good ideas, and then the investments and resources can come. And to continue to think that we shall raise all the problems and government will find solutions, as you all know, is a very defeatist attitude that we must debunk. The last point for me is that we need to take decisive action. Now, the thing about action is that we sometimes think that action is only for activists, but all of us must take decisive actions in the places where we are able to do something. This seems like a simple thing, but one of our biggest impediments for civil society in Uganda, I can tell you, because I've worked with them for many years, is we do not take action. We talk about things and we do nothing. Last week, we talked about Nafasi. If we asked the people here and asked how many of you have become members since the last Zoom call that you had, you may find that very few people have gone on to sign up. And yet we knew that what we were creating, if we had followed that vision, maybe today there would be no civil society organization that is struggling, because there would be enough money to run many of these organizations, because would have been able to collect nearly 500 million per month, and that would be 6 billion in just a year. But we threw away that vision, refused to do anything in terms of action, and now we are at a terrible time. So we talk about good ideas, sometimes we leave them on paper. We talk about governments not doing anything, and also ourselves not doing a lot. So I think we should define our future by taking action and executing in those areas that are critical to our work. Remember that an organization, and this is now to leaders, can execute only if the leader's heart and soul is immersed in the work. I am not calling for micromanagement, but I'm calling to say that we must be, as leaders, be part and immersed in the work of the organization. Because leading is more than just thinking big. And for many of us, smoozing and taking selfies with donors and MPs, and then you post them on Facebook, and you think that that is impact. I think leading must be also about taking action. The leader must be engaged personally and deeply in the work of the organization. And I know I'm saying this because I know some people, the moment they are called executive director, they stop doing anything. They think that their work is to direct like a police traffic officer. And I think that they must see beyond that, because execution means that they must be there and available. Because you have to remember that action requires a comprehensive organization of your organization's work, the operating environment, because that's what you need to understand and be able to do something about. And the leader is the only person in position to achieve that kind of understanding. Why I'm saying the leader is because I need to put responsibility somewhere. Because I know people can come to this call and then they go and blame others. No, leaders, we must do something, because only a leader can make action happen through his or her personal involvement, and because of the ways in which they are able to look and influence the direction of things. So, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to conclude by saying that for me, I'm convinced that making these changes will allow organizations to generate the resources that they need to become resilient in the current pandemic and in the new pandemics that are going to have. Those who want to find any resources, either in social business or in local philanthropy or donor funds, must have these core competencies. I even refuse to talk about local philanthropy here, although I'm doing quite a bit of research in this area. But I can tell you that even the whole notion of philanthropy has been going through a lot of political dynamics. Because, as you know, the philanthropy is about having a heart for humanity and love and these kinds of things. But it has traveled from there to becoming a very capitalistic category of a concept that is now being used by billionaires to market themselves as if they are the ones who are only having the big hearts. For you in Africa who have little, you don't have a big heart. There is even now something called philanthrocapitalism, which is about philanthropy that is trying to now be married with the concept of capitalism. And all these things are important, but that is a discussion which we are going to have in other position papers that we are doing. But I wanted to say that that is not a panacea, because this thing about local, what is local about philanthropy, it also has to be debunked, because sometimes we use these terms to belittle, to make little African things by calling them local. And then we have to be careful about this terminology that we want to bring. But that's not the discussion of today. The discussion of today was to say we must have some core competencies, because we can sit here and talk forever, but we are at a deep critical juncture where our individual and collective leadership needs to be decisive. So we must think, we must vision, we must create solutions, and we must take action. Because indeed, if we put these things together, I think a lot more will be done. And for us, if you ask, oh, is Richard just talking? No, I'm not just talking. What we are doing is actually we are putting together a few training guides, and we are talking to people who we think will use them practically and usefully. So if you are interested, yes, you can contact us at NGO Forum, you can contact NGO Forum and ourselves at CBR, and we see what we can do. But the most important thing is that I think for me, the time is now for us to go back to the basics. And the basics are the 4 areas that I've mentioned. I thank you very much for listening.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Richard.
Okay, great, Richard. Thank you for being truly a thought provocateur. You know, you talked about how we use the word local philanthropy, local NGO, and I'm thinking, local consultant. We do it all the time. Yes. We certainly need a paradigm shift. Resources follow good ideas, I think is one of the core messages. And so we must invest in critical thinking to get those ideas. The well of ideas is running dry, something similar to what Sarah also mentioned. Thanks a lot for raising those core competencies. And also the call to leaders and what leadership is about. Leadership from the front. There's leadership from the back, but I think you're asking for people to lead from the front. Now, just to let you know, I know because of connection, some of you may have come a bit late. We are taking a few notes as the discussion is going. I'll ask Gloria to put the link in the chat. So you can just click that Google Doc and it will give you highlights of some of the conversations as they go along in case you need to step away from your computer or your phone and need to get back. Okay, so someone mute, right. Yes, and I've also seen action. Someone put in some documents in the chat for Ujasiri and Nafasi. So hopefully the next time we have this sort of conversation, there'll be progress to report in that regard. Now, just a quick check on time. We started a bit late. It's 11:48, and I just want to get a sense. We could continue and finish at 12:15, but I also want to see if people are willing to stay till 12:30. Can we use the chat to just give me a sense? And Chris, I'll ask you to help me tabulate. Okay, 12:15. Let's get a few people. When should we stop? 12:15 or 12:30? That's 12:30. Okay, let's go. 12:30, 12:30. Okay, a few more. All right. Someone even said 2 p.m. Okay, 2 p.m. was not an option, but I guess that is out of the box thinking, not even critical, not even critical thinking. Okay, so let's have a quick conversation with the panelists. So we're going to go for 12:30 on the dot. We will finish. Those who have to leave, there'll be a recording so that you'll be able to access it. I saw in the chat, I think Citizen Space TV will also be airing this, and there'll be a report. So if you need to leave early, you'll be able to access the information. Okay, so we have our other thought provocateur. We have Paul Mulindwa. Paul, you work with one of the district NGO networks, and the conversation from Sarah sort of gave us the global perspective, brought it to the national. Richard has also, tried to connect it more to the national. But I just want to hear from you, from the discussions and the points that they raise. Do these resonate? And have you been able, for example, to invest in some of those competences and raise resources for your organization? What's your take on these conversations, Paul?
Thank you very much, Ashanut, and everyone on the call. It's quite a task for Sarah, but I will give my take in the regard that I am asked to. So first and foremost, I work with a network organization. It's actually beyond one district. It's more at a regional level. Like I said in my introduction, the region we normally nowadays call Midwestern or Mid-Albertine region, but we can limit that to the Bunyoro sub-region. So I think for me, what I would say in the regard of the discussion at hand, especially in terms of civil society remaining relevant, is one, the relevance question, especially for us at the subnational level, I say closer to the people, or to those who call the grassroots. I don't like that one. Is the relevance question, and this goes also to what Sarah talked in terms of the ideation question. Richard called it critical thinking. So we have had to deal with the relevance question. How do we remain relevant in the face of the challenges that have been already explained. And many of us really, in regard to the pandemic, thought that the pandemic, for example, perhaps would last weeks. Then we took it to months. We thought in a few months it would be gone. And now we are talking of years. We do not even know how long it will go, especially as the leaving no one behind slogan. Richard has been at the forefront of this. Of the SDGs is seemingly elusive. It's distant from us, especially when it comes from the vaccination politics that has already been spoken to. So the first area we have had to deal with, especially at our level, is how do we remain relevant, given the fact that we directly interact with people, we directly interact with the people we call the vulnerable groups, the voiceless, those who can't, come into spaces like we are all now, the virtual space. So, and that has made a lot to our work. So one way we have done that is creatively work through the smaller groupings. And I think somebody already talked to this, especially the socio-economic groupings. They have called very many different names. Some people call them DSLS, or Village Loans Associations, the women groupings, the youth groupings, and very many other smaller groupings. So that has been one of our methods of work, because we are talking about resources, but it's one thing to think about resources, but what those resources are going for. So if we have resources and we cannot use them for the objectives that we set to work on, then the resources are as good as useless. So there are questions to this, of course, and I asked myself and everyone some of those questions already. How do we fit into their value propositions? Some of these smaller groupings already have the things they cherish. Many of them are inward looking. If it is Paul, Richard, Sarah, and Ashanut in the group of maybe some purpose, we already have a purpose we want to achieve for ourselves. Sometimes the bigger common good of society, of the community, in areas such as governance, in areas such as advocacy, governance to advocacy, and the whole rights issues, is not the major purpose why these groupings are coming together. But that is what we have to deal with now, and they try and they interest these smaller groupings into those areas. So this is how, if I can go a little bit deeper into that, linking our work through and with. Sarah talked about the more formal civil society. I think she was meaning the so-called organizations, sorry to use that word, but the organizations, the NGOs that we know about, those who have a certificate or a permit, but they are, the civil society, like she explained very well, is much bigger than that. So working through and with the less formal civil society is very important for me, and we have been using this quite a lot. And also somebody talked about building institutions. So if we build institutions looking at only our organizations or the formal civil society and leaving out the other civil society I talked about, for lack of a better word, I called less formal civil society, then we shall have a problem. We shall have very big and very strong organizations, perhaps, but probably not serving very well the needs that we set to serve. So we have been able to raise resources by trying to connect socioeconomic aspirations with accountability, participation, and the rights objectives. Again, I'm taking you back to the less formal civil society or the social economic groupings. So working with their core objectives that they set out to work with, but also now introducing or interesting these groupings into the other areas of common good, like accountability, like participation into local government processes and other processes, being able to ask companies, for example, where there are bigger companies, we are in the region where IOCs or international oil companies are operating. So interesting them to ask questions which are not necessarily those that benefit them individually, but benefit, the bigger community is what we are doing right now. And that helps us to, go around, for example, now the SOPs, because you can no longer call a bigger meeting. You can no longer call a community meeting. You just have to find ways of going through these already organized groupings if almost you have to do anything on ground. So we are supporting CBOs because I already told you I work for a network organization. We are supporting CBOs and even higher level organizations, what people are called social enterprises. We call them different names here. We call them nature-based enterprises, if at all, the one putting in resources is looking at environment and natural resources, where we source for support for these groupings, and we undertake kind of business-oriented projects that integrate participation and right objectives that I already talked about. We are supporting CBOs, I already talked to, women and youth in enterprises like apiary, tree growing, and other nature-based enterprises to achieve multiple objectives. The first objective being the economic livelihood, and we cannot run out from it, empowerment of households. The second being benefits to the environment and natural resources for that particular area. But also the third being able to achieve now the participation, the rights of the governance, the policy action-oriented objectives, holding leaders to account. This is what we are trying to do. So can these groups, for example, ask questions relating to education in their areas? Can they ask questions relating to roads and the interest in government and local government to work on those social services? Can they ask questions relating to service delivery in the bigger sense, like the accountability bit, being able to follow up a project that is happening in their area and asking questions. Why is this classroom block probably not as good as we thought? They are not engineers, but given smaller techniques, they can ask certain questions within their range. There are, again, a few questions. What about those that are not in these formal or semi-formal institutions? That's a question. How do we reach out to them? And our approach has been work with these, I don't like calling them informal groupings, but semi-formal groupings, and reach out to those that are not in these groupings. Probably sometimes we call them different names: vulnerable children, vulnerable women, all those kinds of groups. But also most times, like I've already said, these groupings are inward looking. They are looking at their own selves. They are looking at Paul, Sarah, Richard, and Ashanut, who are in that, kind of association, without looking at the bigger picture of the community, of the society. So that's where we have to come in and provide a bridge for that. Then lastly, we are also trying to tap into This perhaps will generate some debate, trying to tap into and encouraging, some civil society organizations to attract development resources from business organizations. There are already tough comments in this regard. I already told you that in the region where we work, there are already very many big business organizations or companies. For that case, the IOCs, the international oil companies, and the road construction companies, and others. And many of these have aspects which really fit into some of the civil society organizations' aspirations or areas of work, child protection, and so on. So the debate has been, how do we work with these business organizations, business entities, without burning our feet? The areas that we interest to work with them are very pertinent. I've already hinted on some of those examples, like child protection or environment or whichever it is. But how do we work with them and we remain independent? We are able to ask them questions of accountability themselves. So that's perhaps a debate that we can have going forward. But I really believe personally that this is an area, and we are interesting our members to go into these areas. There are quite many. We are seeing many calls for partnerships in these areas, and the more we come up with rules of the game and remain independent. After all, most of these monies are taxpayers' money. I perhaps know that most of you know this. Like when an oil company is calling for services of the nature that I have spoken to, the rights, children's rights, for example, this is money that they are going to ask for at the end of the day from government. Claim for in terms of the costs that are reimbursables. So in essence, this is taxpayers' money, and I would believe if we are able to remain independent, we are able to not burn our feet, then this is also one area that we are encouraging our civil society members to participate in. We are already aware that Moses already spoke very well about the way the funding, not only at the national level, but also at all our levels, is projectized. It's project. So even from the bigger funding baskets that we all know about, the DGF, the CAS, the GAP, which ended recently, they are all looking at project with less of the core funding to organizations like ours. So thinking about those new areas of social enterprises I talked about, and some of which we are working with, is I think one of the ways to go. We are already thinking about how do we sustain. Okay, someone can mute. Thinking about how do we sustain, the organizations. Someone was talking about building institutions. How do we fit into the core needs of organizations into the arrangements? I talked about the social enterprise arrangements, and an organization, a civil society organization, is able to continue working, but also the other benefits are being achieved in that regard. So I could have spoken more and more, but for now I can end at that. I thank you, and over to you, Ashanut.
Okay, great. Thanks a lot, Paul. Now, just for people to know in terms of process, I'll just have a couple more questions for the panelists. George, I saw your hand raised. You will be the first person once we open the floor to ask your question. But let me just go to Sarah. I mean, Paul has really, helped us think about how do you raise resources locally, the importance of having interventions that are relevant, that speak to the needs of the communities. We said not grassroots, but the communities we work with. But also, I sense from your presentation, Paul, already a paradigm shift around the language that we use. You're talking about nature-based enterprises, not nature-based CSOs, And I also saw in the chat, I think there was a point from Arthur around the need to shift the conversation from looking for resources to generating, and examples have been given. Alan, you talked about the crowdsourcing. So there are, I think, lots of opportunities and examples can draw upon. Sarah, raising these resources, I think, as we're saying, is going to take a paradigm shift. And in the meantime, as we continue doing this work, we will, need to seek for these resources from, what we're calling the global north. There's a conversation around decolonization of aid. You talked about ideation. So there are conversations happening that maybe we could be involved in to try and shift the narrative and some of the thinking and influence the decisions. What is your view on how organizations here within Uganda can be part of that conversation and actually be able to shift some of that of the discourse?
Okay, so I mean, first of all, understanding a little bit about what we're talking about when we talk about things like decolonization. And I mean, I think, it may sound like theorizing to a lot of people, but I think theorizing also has its place. Theorizing the work that we do is critically important for the growth of the sector. So I apologize if I sound like there's too much theorizing and so on. But just to give a little bit of background on what we mean by decolonization. So Sylvia Tamale, in her groundbreaking book, Decolonization and Afrofeminism, describes it as a process of deconstructing colonial interpretations and analysis of the social world. For those of us who have been colonized and live with the consequences of colonization, one of the critical things is decolonization of the mind, about returning to the annals of history to find ourselves and to become fluent in our cultural knowledge systems in order to develop a critical consciousness and to reclaim our humanity. That's what she's saying. In other words, a lot of what we are doing is borrowed from elsewhere, and we have borrowed it uncritically. That's not to say it's all bad. It's not to say it's all bad and that it must all be rejected. It is to say that our awareness should be there about where we are getting these ideas from and where we are getting these narratives from, and what they blind us to in our own realities and in our own communities. So Richard has talked about, for example, the fact that actually there is huge amounts of giving in this COVID-19, and it's happening here within Uganda. We're all giving to some cause around responding to this COVID crisis. But at that same time, we're blinded to it. it's not of any value. I think Jackie Asimwe and a few others in CSO and the sort of African philanthropy network are now trying to make this work visible and trying to make these contributions a lot more visible, a lot more accessible to us in how communities are donating their time, their human resource, and the little bits of money they have to address, some of the critical issues. So, I mean, it sort of blinds us to that, and automatically just puts us in the pathway of, okay, how do we get these donor funds? Mm-hmm. Maybe what we should be asking ourselves is, how do I build my organization without going to donor funds at all? Is there a possibility? Are there examples? I know of one, and it's a small community-based organization that started with cake baking, selling their cakes in the communities, and through that, set up a saving scheme in order to set up what they called a flexible resource base, a reserve. That's what they call it, a reserve. And with that started the capital for their organization. And then the second thing that they did was develop relationships and links with the local, political networks and so on and so forth, in order to make those communities aware of the services that they were providing and the value add that they were providing. They got donations from local businesses in those areas in the form of in-kind donations and so on. And through that, really built a program that they felt gave them control to respond to community needs at that level, without the sort of mediation of the need to do the kinds of work that you have to do with philanthropists such as the organization I work for, and so on and so forth. Now, they did it over a number of years, and through that built the capital that they needed. Got into all kinds of entrepreneurial things, reusable pads, all of these things in order to build that flexible income resource. Now, of course, as they grew, they were able to now come and try and negotiate, because as their visibility grew, the interest in how they approach their work from various quarters also grew, because like Richard said, it's the ideas and the approaches, not the lack of money, that create. So they built that capital, they built that framework, and through that, were able to negotiate and able to choose which donors, because I mean, donors aren't out there asking people to come and take their money. Let's be fair to them. They're not. And so I guess, what are we out there trying to do? What is the purpose of the exercise we're engaging in, even before we think about where is the money going to come from? And broaden our horizons to look at what's in front of us. I know women's groups, and women's groups have been very entrepreneurial in that sense, because especially the ones in the sort of rural context, because they are the ones for whom resources are particularly difficult to access. And so they become very sort of the people used to cut grass and sell it to the to the farmers who were feeding their cows and all of this thing. I mean, the point I'm making is, one, the decolonization of our minds will open us up to more possibilities coming from amongst ourselves, which may also root us much better in the sort of realities of the communities that we engage with. That's not to say that seeking donor funds is a bad thing. By all means, go for them, but have the awareness about what that means. And it opens up a space to ask critical questions. The whole decolonization debate has raised real questions about donor practice and how they fund in Africa and how they fund in the global, and how, as you go up into their hierarchies, they become less diverse and so on. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Sarah. I am mindful of the time. Just one quick question to Richard. Richard, you talk about critical thinking, making the space for that. I saw in the chat a couple of questions around how are we going to resource the critical thinking? Do we now go again to the philanthropists? Can we go to our governments? We know how our governments are. So how, first of all, creating the space practically, what are your suggestions? And secondly, how do we resource that? In just about a minute, because I see our time is going and would like other people to contribute. Thanks, Richard.
Okay, thank you very much, Ashanut. I saw the debate between Moses and Arthur, and I loved it because they are all making very important points. One, and just to agree a bit with Moses, is that, you know, critical thinking at the individual level, and you see, when Sarah talks about decolonization, she's really calling, this is a clarion call to critical thinking, which is to say that we should be, as first and foremost, very skeptical of received knowledge. We should throw away the knowledge that has been received, that has kept us where we are. I mean, Leonard made a very good point when he said that 5 years ago, when we were talking about Nafasi, we had counted, we are 500,000 people. If we gave 100,000 shillings every month, we would have 5 billion every year, every month would have nearly 2 or 3 trillion shillings by now. But what stopped us from making that money? Why are we 5 years in our lives with zero money? Yet we had an idea that actually would have put 3 trillion shillings in the accounts of civil society from our own funding. This is, and it is, Jackie who gave me this term. It's the problem is the mental infrastructure up here. We must do something around clarifying our visions, where we can say, move from zero to trillions by all of us agreeing on that vision, being able to say, yes, this is something that is important, and investing in it. I think that for me, so then the question of resourcing critical thinking, really, I think the first one at the individual level, the leaders, because this is about leadership first, should be investing in themselves with the little that they have. So yes, even when you think about people giving you through local philanthropy and other means, don't just quickly run to them when you have no ideas, because the most dangerous bus to board is the one that has no destination. And people are tired of listening to us and we are taking them nowhere. So I think that for me, that's an important thing. The other thing, just to add very quickly, is that, of course, what we are offering here are really returning to the basics. to say that if we are going to mobilize, if we are going to get the resources that we actually need, these are basics that we must put in place.
Richard, you still there? Did we lose Richard? Okay, as we wait for Richard to come back, let me check. We had, I wrote your name down, George Tumuhimbisiwe, you had a question? George, can you? Okay, then I saw James Muhindo, you had your hand up. As we wait for Richard to get back.
Thank you very much, Ashanut. Thank you, Sarah and Richard, for sharing a very insightful thought. My comment is, us as civil society, I think we need to look into what the economists call total factor productivity. And this looks at the productivity of all inputs taken together collectively. I think what I've observed is that we as civil society have numbers and we work in collective groups, personally coordinating a coalition of over 60 NGOs. But the productivity of this park is limited to a few individuals within that park. And I think that's one of the things that are holding us back as we reflect on things that we can do better, things we can change, things we can improve. The issue of optimizing the effort or contribution of each member of the collective is something we need to look into and move to a place where we would, we can be fine having a smaller team that is all in and contributing to the result, to the total output, as opposed to having a bigger team whose weight is being carried by just a few within that park. It's a challenge that I believe civil society deals with at organizational level, where you find their staff that are not, that are dead weight, excuse my language, or at coalition and network level, where you find their members that are just riding on the weight of others. And the resultant product is that these few can only do so much to achieve the goal. And the others who are not contributing to that, because they are dead weight, they start wearing off those who are pushing the cause. And you find ultimately there are cases of those we are trying to influence, or the change that we are trying to make being impeded by those who think not everyone in the park is not contributing, because there are more people that are not contributing as opposed to those who are contributing. And that's why even amongst government, private sector, and even the general public, the image they have of civil society is people who do the work we do for a living and not for the cause. We are employed here, so we get money and that's all we do, but we don't believe in the causes we are doing, because they've seen many of us, and I think this was echoed briefly by Dr. Ssewakiryanga, where you find we don't take action even when we meet and agree on certain positions. So we need to move from this place where we have a bigger percentage riding on the outputs or the efforts of just a few. It's only when we move from that what the economists call total factor productivity will be achieved, where you find every single weight or every single voice that comes has a result at the end, not continuing to speak within ourselves, but we are not having result. Otherwise, thank you very much.
Everyone needs to carry their weight. There are a couple of interesting questions for you in the chat there, John, you may want to reflect on. Okay, George, are you back? No, Robert Kakenga, I think Robert, I've seen Robert, Kaganga John, I've seen Margaret and Benson. So let's start with Robert Kakenga. I hope I got that right.
This is Robert Kakuru. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks. I guess okay, yeah.
Okay. So thank you very much. I'm Kakuru Robert from Kavale. I'm happy being part of this, and I lead the team at Kick Corruption out of Uganda. I think my question goes to Richard, and I would like to appreciate the presentations. You guys have made our day. We are just doing our work at home, but enjoying this important discussion. So my question is about when Richard talked about critical thinking and societal connection, where we are now during this period. I want to tell you, Ashanut, that we have learned a lot on how society connects together, how people live together and support each other during this pandemic. A family with a COVID-19 case and the people around them are supporting the family, are providing this hot water for bathing, some leaves to put, and you see they are supporting each other. They are more connected within this time. And now people are saying we can support ourselves without government, because government, we don't see it with us. We don't see civil society close with us. So how do we survive ourselves? So my question is, how do we continue to connect with the society that already sees that it can survive on its own if supported by ideas that connect their dots, without necessarily waiting for the ideas that come from above, from the elites or from the donor community, that this is how we want it, this is an indicator to address, this is how it should go. But how do we utilize the society connection and the resources that are available for us to keep sustaining our societies and ourselves? Thank you very much.
Okay, excellent. So we do have resources we can draw upon. Time check, it's 12:29. Permission to proceed, may I see in the chat? Yes, no? Permission to proceed? Yes, no? Silence? We're talking about authoritarianism here. May I? Okay, let's proceed. I'll try and do five to maybe 15 more minutes, yeah? Okay, Kaganga, let's try and be brief, please. Kaganga, John, sorry.
John, okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I think you are hearing me?
Yes.
Hello?
Clearly. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for, me, I'm so happy with this meeting. First of all, even though the organizers and the presenters, that is one. Two, my point what I want to raise, according to what I've observed, that I'm Kaganga John, based in Mitiana at the grassroots, but we have a big problem of digital divide. Therefore, we need, as a government, as NGOs, as international NGOs, all of us, to see how can we bridge the gap. That is a very big problem. Two, I'm so happy because even the UN declared this decade of action, and whatever we have learned really can help us, and we have to put into action, as the presenter have said. Last but not least, this is a testimony.
I think we are missing that testimony. We'll get back to you. Margaret?
I am at the grassroots to as many people, as many organizations, international and national.
Okay, John, we're going to come back to you. Let's go to Margaret. Margaret, your hand was up.
Yes. Thank you very much.
And they are ready even to support. But change.
Sorry, John. Sorry, John, we'll get back to you. Let's get to Margaret now. Your points. Margaret, please.
Thank you very much for the presentation. I don't know whether Richard is here and
he's back.
Sarah.
Yes.
One of my issues is the issue of politicization of everything. And this has permeated in the society everywhere, that it becomes very difficult. It will be very difficult for visionary thinkers because their ideas will be politicized. Everything in this country is so politicized. So once you politicize everything, it comes with stigmatization, it comes with smear campaigns, and makes people unproductive. So I think what we need to work out with is to free ourselves into politicizing every issue. How do we work on that? How can we get ourselves to move forward and be able to come up with ideas without politicizing every issue? If a government supports anything, it's politicized. If civil society comes on this side, it's politicized. And then we have a deadlock.
Yeah. Okay, thanks a lot, Margaret. Now, just to let you know, 1, 2, 3, there are only four hands that I'm going to take. Please, I'm coming to you, Benson. Good to see you. Let's be brief. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. I want to thank everybody who has presented, Richard and others. I just want to add one thing briefly, 1 or 2 things. One is that for us to think strategically, we must get out of the box and start learning from others, including bad situations. I want to pick out 2 examples. One is from the corporate world. I don't know the executive director, even the owners or shareholders of Coca-Cola, but all their efforts is to market their products. But when you come to civil society, it is the opposite. We market ourselves, we market our organizations, we market everything about us. But what is that we are offering should be the cracks, because people support. Our product is our life element. We cannot survive without our products. So I think we need to learn from the corporate world. All the resources they do is marketing the product. Secondly, I want to learn from a bad situation. Here, a very fake organization, Frolend, came here with a product tailored to support the people. And they were able to collect over 1.2 billion in our region. From the people who we always front as poor, unable to support any cause. They looked at the community, they designed the product, asked them to support it, and since it was resonating with their desires and their needs, they backed it up. This is something we can learn. The products we design for our communities, our interventions, why are they not able to support it when when another one comes? So I think the design of our products, the way I articulate this is critical. Lastly, I think the issue of volunteer service. If you go to the communities, for us at the grassroots, the bulk of our work, the anchor of our work is on community volunteers. They do the monitoring, they do the sensitization, they do everything. We hardly look at them, and they, even our ambassadors, and they form the basis of our impact. So I think when we are thinking and reaching out, we should be thinking on how to build a solid base and support with the local people. And I think this way we'll be able.
Thank you. We have a lot to draw on. Thanks a lot for that, Benson. George, I can see your back. To Muhimbise. George? No? All right. Simon Peter Okut?
Thank you. I would like to stress one issue. First, I would like to thank all the panelists. My issue is with how best we can bring young organizations. By young, I mean the new organizations who might not have experienced leaders. For one, let me say, our organization is still new, and we might need strategies on how best we can build the capacities of these organizations so that they can re-strategize, especially in this trying moment of COVID-19. Okay. And also how best we can network with other experienced organizations so that we are able to move the same footing. So that's my issue about building the capacity of these organizations. Thank you.
Okay, that's very clear. Onek Freezer, then Kayinga Mood, and then we shall wrap up. Onek Freezer. Freezer.
Thank you. Yes.
Freezer.
Good afternoon.
Okay.
Good afternoon to everyone.
Hi.
Our meeting our record is in the organization.
Okay, seems like you are frozen. So we'll take the last contribution, Kayinga Mood.
Yes, thank you so much, Senior Richard Ssewakiryanga. You were a great inspiration to many of us younger people moving into civil society fraternity. My submission, I feel that with other civil society, I'm called Kayinga Mood Digital. I'm coordinating a network of community-based actors in Greater Masaka, 75 of them. But this has been a journey for 15 years. And I believe that, as Mr. Ssewakiryanga said, thinking outside the box is very important. I got the dream at 17 years to change my community. But I realized that communities are endless. The biggest role is to inspire others to take action in their respective communities. And walking the talk is very, very important. I'll just share a small experience. Now the oil pipe is happening in the Greater Masaka. A lot of advocacy has been moving, policy briefs going on, but with our involvement as Cotifone, we go into actions. When we propose a proposal and we don't see it moving on, we'll keep raising the pertinent issues that are in our context. And we are seeing things changing. Much as intimidation continues to those that goes advocacy. So for me, I believe to others, we need to learn from our seniors, and our seniors should be at our disposal. And we need this platform being now digital. When lockdown goes off, we want to keep this engagement even physically, that we see it with experts and younger people. For you who are getting at another stage, with others comes on, then we share that experience. But we remain focused on our community issues because we are citizens and we can do within our mandate as actors. I beg to submit, and I'm very happy to be involved with the partner of NGO Forum in Osaka.
Thank you very much for Kayinga for leaving us on that very inspirational note on what is possible when putting time and investing in people and in our community. So I am going to give thought provocateurs a minute each to either respond to a question or share a final reflection. Let's start with, I'll start with, go to Paul and then end up with Richard. That question around politicization, you might be well placed to address it. Can you give it a shot? Are you there, Sarah? Did she drop off? Okay, let's see, Richard. Are you there? Oh, Sarah, you're there. Oh, good. Thank you. Yeah. Just some sort of last reflections and
Well, I just want to thank everybody for the participation, and let me thank NGO Forum for inviting me. I want to thank everybody for their submissions. I have learned a lot. You've raised questions for me that I must reflect on, and that I promise to sort of go and do those as I refine the sort of thinking. I just have two comments. You know, on Richard's point about critical thinking, I guess the question that we have to ask ourselves is, what investments are we making in funding our own movements? You know, critical thinking or thinking through what it is we're trying to do is part of our own investments in strengthening our movements as well as our institutions. And so we can't afford to do without it for ourselves.
as part of our own learning, as part of our own wisdom, as part of how we get a better sense of how we are doing with the work that we are doing. And it's an ongoing life learning process. And like I said, I've been here, I have learned in the 2 hours, and I'm definitely going to go and reflect and even change some of my work as my response as a thing.
Okay, you still there? Or is it good? Yeah.
I was thinking about politicizing political understanding, your political consciousness, and it doesn't mean you have to go out there and be confrontational with everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes. We can hear you. Yes, being political doesn't mean confronting everybody.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. It doesn't mean fighting with everybody. It just means having a consciousness and an understanding of the underlying factors and drivers, not responding to what you see, but trying to see and understand what lies underneath what it is you're doing. Why are things forming? Why is it, we're not talking about these things as happening just to Uganda. Uganda is militarized and securitized in the region, on the continent. This is what I mean, you know? It's not about that you must go and fight and confront everybody. It means you must deepen your understanding to beyond the reaction, to always questioning ourselves about why it is we're doing this, what it is we're responding to, what are the tools of analysis we're using. And somebody said, it was Professor Adebayo who said, as Africans, it is incumbent on you to always question whose narrative are you buying into and whose narrative are you perpetuating. This is a luxury you cannot afford not to do as African people. Raise your curiosity and always ask, okay, who haven't I listened to in all of this?
Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay. Wonderful, Sarah. Paul, let's just give you an opportunity to share any final reflection.
Thank you, Ashanut. I think for me, the last reflection I want to go away with from here is in terms of institutional building in the perspective of the general civil society, rather than only building organizations and linking it to resourcing for development. I think I want to think we can have a discussion on building together. How do we build the greater civil society to build organizations or institutions and also resource these institutions? I think for me that's going to be a reflection that I'll go away with from here. I would like to thank the NGO Forum for giving me this opportunity, but also Ashanut, our moderator, the presenters, and all those on the call. I thank you.
Wonderful, thank you. And Richard, last but not least.
Thank you, Ashanut. Apologies, I dropped off, but that is the digital authoritarianism at work. We can't do much about it. But the point for me, I think in terms of ending, let me just, you know, in church, we usually say testimonies are more powerful than anything else. So let me just say that for me, what I've decided is that after over 25 years of doing development work, I want to invest the next many years that I'll get in knowledge production. Why? Because I think that is where the deficit is. Invest in thinking, invest in writing, invest in researching, invest in sharing skills. And probably that is the contribution I can make, because I don't think we are going to fix anything now unless we go back and fix our mental infrastructure. So it's possible that maybe at this point, if I'm to end, is to someone to invite everybody to spend some time on that as a specific investment. Thank you to everybody, and thank you very much to NGO Forum.
Wonderful. Thank you, thought provocateurs. I mean, I will clap on behalf of everyone and give you, great thanks for really stimulating this discussion. Just a few key action points that seem to emerge. There will be a report, but a heavy emphasis on critical thinking, creating that space to decolonize the mind, to a space where we can learn from experiences. There's a lot that is happening that we can draw on. So maybe that's something for NGO Forum to reflect on, creating that space. How do we resource it? Maybe we resource it ourselves and then get others to join us in that space. The second thing is around the competencies and the knowledge building. The competence that you spoke about has to be a very deliberate effort, and it's exciting that you're saying you're putting these into some manuals. So maybe that's something again to be looked at. The other thing to emphasize is leadership, action from leadership. How do we really support our leaders, enable our leaders, create opportunities for networking, hold our leaders accountable, and be able to work with our leaders to encourage collective action. The fourth area is institution building. And I think, Sarah, you really emphasize that. Where are we without strong institutions? I'm really getting serious about building strong institutions, thinking on our board. What is our mission? What is our vision? Why do we exist? And as you heard from some of the comments, we have institutions at different levels, Moses, as you're aware. So what intervention for different ones? And I think finally, you use the word entrepreneurial response, Sarah, to COVID-19. But I think it's all part of our mind, the part around how, in order to be able to solution oriented, because that's what an entrepreneur is. You look for the challenge, invest, and generate some resources in it and also do some good. So thank you all. It's been such an incredible process. A lot. NGO Forum, thank you for the opportunity. I now hand over to Moses to make the concluding remarks. Thank you.
And we want a group photo.
Hey, a group photo. Hey, Chris.
So everybody should open their camera.
Yes.
Yes. We do the group photo now. And Chris is doing that somewhere?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Why you be talking as is organized?
Okay, great. Okay, as we do the group photo, I don't know whether it has already been done, and it's really nice looking at you, everybody. It looks like looking so well in this lockup or lockdown. You almost tempt the president to extend it. But on a very serious note, I would really want to thank you, and I want to thank you for this. Has been really a very rich conversation. I want to thank everybody for the fertile mind that you came with on this dialogue. I was also looking at the chat here, and it was really a melting pot of ideas, and it made me wonder whether really the well of ideas is dry. The well of ideas seems to be, not dry at all. But thank you so much for this great dialogue that we've had. Arthur, who is on the call here, likes the phrase that let's continue the thinking, because where a lot of things are illegal, thinking is not yet illegal. It hasn't been outlawed. So the call on us to be able to do critical thinking, for us to be able to think as a sector, is something that we need to continue doing, because it's not illegal and it's not about to be outlawed. So let's continue the thinking. And as NGO Forum, it's really our honor, our singular honor to be able to host this dialogue. The outcome document will be shared. That comes out of this conversation. All the different summaries that are from our presenters will all be shared with everybody. I just want to end with one last thing, that those that are registered members of NGO Forum, please check your email, because we're having our annual general meeting this Thursday, that is after tomorrow. And we sent you an email, or somebody must have called you. So we'd like to encourage you, if you haven't registered, to register before Thursday. Once again, thank you so much. This was meant to be 2 hours of a conversation, but it has actually, it's close to 3 hours, and we want to thank you for staying on the call for this dialogue. Thank you, Ashanut, for the moderation, and thank you to Richard, Paul, and Sarah for sufficiently provoking us into critical thinking, into decolonizing, deconstructing our colonial interpretations and analysis. I think we leave this call much wiser, and as NGO Forum, this will all be put together into something that we can share with you. Thank you, and have a good afternoon.